Hello students, I promised I'd make a stab at doing a quick recording of everything we went through in class today with regard to putting together a scene of a child's room with windows and things like that. There are just a few ins and outs that you should know. So really quickly I'm just going to construct a sort of bare bones child's room here. So I will tap N on the keyboard, and bring up my little side menu here where I can actually specify the dimensions of my cube. Right now you can see the dimensions in X, Y, and Z are just 2 Blender units. And I think we decided that I'll bring up my calculator here. Seems like 7.3 something Blender units, or about 24 feet. So I'll just kind of keep my numbers a little bit more rounder here. So in X I'll go 7.5. In Y I'll go 7.5. And then I'll scale this whole thing down in Z until it's just kind of a nice skinny, about 1.185. That looks good. Okay, so that's going to be the size of my room. Basically, that's going to be the floor. I'll now tap 5 on the number pad to go into an orthographic view. And then I will start constructing the walls. So I'll create a new cube. And this time its dimensions in X will be 0.185. I'll just kind of keep things uniform here. In Y I'll have it be, I'll get a different view so you can see what's going on here. In Y I'll have it be 7.5 Blender units, so it's the same length as the room. And in Z I'll have it be maybe 2.8. Actually, I think we decided 10-foot walls were about 3 meters high, give or take a little bit. So I'll just go 3 meters high. Then I can place this right on the edge there. And of course, if I really want to be perfectly precise here, I could also move my 3D cursor to this corner, for instance, of the floor, and then I could move my selection to the 3D cursor or something like that. This will work for now. So there's one wall. Shift D, and in X we need to move this. Let's go 7.5. And you can see that that is just a little beyond where it actually needs to be. Actually, it's 0.185 Blender units too far in the X because of this overlap here. So I can just tap G, X, minus 0.185, and that should line up exactly correctly. There we are. Okay, so other than that, now I can just duplicate this wall one more time. From a top orthographic view, I can rotate that 90 degrees, kind of bring it up here. And if I really want to center it in X, I can come over here, and the X location, I can just change that to 0, and it'll be perfectly centered because our original floor is still perfectly centered. So that's now perfectly lined up. There's a little bit of overlap here which I don't want, so I'll scale this whole thing in the X-axis. And since it's perfectly lined up, just scaling in X, I'm scaling both sides of this little piece of wall. And that is now perfectly lined up over here as well. So there are my 3 walls. I'm going to treat this like a movie set. I'm going to leave off this 4th wall so that the camera has access to the scene. Things like that. I will, however, create a ceiling. Shift D on the floor. Tap Z to constrain myself to just the Z axis. And then these walls are 3 blender units tall, so I should be able to type 3.185, and that ceiling is now exactly in place. So perfect. Alright, next I'm going to make a couple of changes to my camera. Tap 0 on the number pad. Shift F allows me to navigate with the mouse and gaming controls. So hold down A to kind of strafe left here. Q allows me to go down. That allows me to look into the room with a pretty good view. Now this is a pretty wide angle camera. If you can see, I've got my camera data up over here. And the sensor size is 32 millimeters. Focal length is 35 millimeters. Now, if I'm trying to match an existing camera, my sensor size on a full frame camera, like the one that I took your class photos, your still life photos with the other day, would have a 36 millimeter sensor. So that's kind of an important distinction, and you can see the effect that that has is it gives us a little bit more of the view inside of the same focal length. I'm going to zoom in. Basically the focal length is our lens, so I'm going to change that from 35 to 70 millimeters. You can see that that gives me a much more compressed view. So once again I'll tap Shift F on the keyboard, and then S allows me to kind of back up a little, and that gives me sort of a nice inside view of the room. That looks pretty good. Okay, so now if we were to look at this scene rendered in a rendered viewport, you can see it's totally dark because, for one thing, our lamp, I mean the scene does have the default lamp in it, point lamp. It's actually outside of the room. But even if we were to grab that lamp, let's click over here in the outliner, move it in the Z axis so that it actually comes into our room, and let's see, we're still outside, aren't we? Move it in the X axis as well. You can see that that's a little bit of a weird way to light a room. I mean, you know, maybe if we had a lamp over here in the corner or something like that, but this room has no windows. It's kind of a padded wall prison cell, not very appealing. So let's actually put a window in here, because that's where kind of one of your first challenges in building a room actually comes in. So back into object mode, I'm going to click on this. Well, first of all, I'm going to name my objects here. They're all called cube right now, so I'm going to call this floor, wall underscore, what is this, east? Let's see. Yeah, that'll be east. Wall underscore, whoop. I don't know what I did there. Oh, come on. There we go. Wall underscore north. Wall underscore west. We've already named the floor, so now let's also name the ceiling. Whoop. Ceiling. Okay, so those are all named. And I'm going to grab our east wall here, tab into edit mode, and then I'm going to make a few loop cuts to make a window. Control R is my shortcut for loop cut, or you can always come over here to Tools and click on this button here, Loop Cut and Slide. And that gives me the option to just kind of make some loop cuts here. Slide them around and get them into position, and I'm basically just kind of trying to cordon off an area that'll make for a good window. There we go. That's a good window. So now go into face select mode. I'm going to click this face and delete it. Click the next face in and delete it. And that leaves kind of this hollowed out wall thing. We don't really want that to be hollow, so let's go into edge select mode and option click on the loop of the window there. Then shift option click on the other side so we have both loops selected, and then we can open our edge menu by clicking or tapping Control E on the keyboard, then bridge edge loops. Okay, and that gives us a nice window. It's closed off, it's solid, the geometry is proper there. So now we have a window. Let's give ourselves a light source. Let's get rid of this point lamp. And over here under my lamp properties, I'm going to change this into a sun lamp. So I'll just point this so that it would be actually coming kind of directly through the window, maybe at a little bit of an angle. That's kind of nice. And then take it outside of the room. Kind of doesn't matter. The position of a sun lamp doesn't matter, just the direction. And it has no decay, so just kind of be aware that for our reference we can at least sort of see where things are happening there. So now if I look at a rendered view, you can see that I've got a pretty dark area here. Oh, actually I don't. Hold on a second. Oh, that's because my sun lamp is set to 100, which is a ridiculous level for a light that doesn't have any fall off, no decay. So that's as if every surface here had a power of 100. I often find a good value for the sun lamp is about 6 for illuminating things on the outside. You can see what that looks like here. That looks pretty bright. On the inside, however, now this is more what I was expecting. You can see that the room's pretty dark. That's not a very realistic result, because you know, if a window is open and sunlight is coming in directly, it hits the floor and then it bounces around a lot more than this and actually illuminates your room. This is still pretty dark and gloomy. The reason for that is that we do not have enough dynamic range in our scene, in the renderings of our scene, to actually handle the sun as bright as it should be. Like I say, if we look on the outside, this is getting so bright that it's basically just making pure white pixels. So we're kind of starting to get to the point where we can't really see detail there. The problem is that's not actually as bright as the sun should be. The sun should be brighter so that it actually can give us some more light in here to bounce around. So in order to handle more dynamic range, in order to be able to turn the sun up without totally blooming everything out and have enough light that it will bounce around realistically inside of our room the way the real sun would, we actually need to change our color management. So if we click over here under the scene data, this little icon with the sun and the cylinder and the sphere, click on that and go to this color management drop down. We can see that under render we're just using our default color management right now. So if I click that and I change it to filmic, then that will have, and I usually choose just base contrast as my look unless I have a good reason for kind of going stylistically somewhere else. That will have the effect of sort of compressing that dynamic range that we're seeing on our monitor. So this we can give this, I think, up to like 24 stops of dynamic range now, which means basically the upshot is that we can turn our sun lamp way up. So rather than 6, we can go, let's say, like 35. You can see that, yeah, we're getting like pure white on the outside of the house now. We've still got some gray up here. And inside of the house now, if we let that resolve for a minute, you can see that it's much more realistically lit. Like the light's bouncing around and we're kind of starting to get some real, you know, illumination here just from the sunlight streaming in through the window. Okay, so that's all well and good. As was pointed out in class, however, since this is a path tracing renderer, every pixel here is sending out, let's see, our preview is currently set to, let's look under sampling here. Preview is currently set to 32 samples, so every pixel sends out 32 rays in random directions to try to figure out how illuminated they should be. And so you can see that we're getting a lot of speckles here. This is a very noisy picture. One thing we can do to help with that is we can kind of bias these samples toward where the light should be coming from. The way we do that, I'm going to go back into just a shaded viewport and look at a top view. Here's our window. The way we can create that bias, we can go over here to our Create menu and create a lamp. We have to use an area lamp for this. And then here under my lamp data, I'm going to make it a rectangle and increase the size quite dramatically to the same size as that window. Specifically, that's what we're going for here. So rotate that in Y by 90 degrees, move it over here into our window. And you can see that's a little too big, so I'm going to shrink it down just a little. There we go. And right now, this thing is a lamp. It's a light source set to shine into our room. But what we need to do is make it, rather than a light source, we're going to make it into a portal. So we just check this little box here, and that biases those paths as they spread out from each pixel that we're rendering. It biases them toward this window, so that more of them should be able to realize that they should be fairly well lit from that window. And then at that point, you know, our image should come out a little less noisy. Now, to me, the difference is pretty subtle. I don't know if, you know, if it makes a huge difference or not. I haven't tried measuring it or something like that, but supposedly that can help. All right, so that's one way to create a room with direct sunlight coming through the window. If the sun were not coming through the window directly, you can actually just treat the window as if it were the light source, because you're basically at that point just receiving reflected light. It's not directional through the window to the extent that it is when the sun is shining directly through the window. So what we could do in that case is actually just take this light source, this area lamp. We could delete the sun lamp and take this area lamp and just illuminate our room with that. You know, and that indirect window light tends to be very nice and diffused and pretty that way. So that would actually work. So I'm going to do a couple of other things here that we ran through in class. A couple of you were wondering about kind of getting dust to show up properly in the you know, like light rays through dust and all that kind of stuff. You know, if light shows up, if you can see light rays streaming into a room, it's because the light is hitting particulate in the room, dust and things like that. So what we need to do is make a volumetric shader. So I'm just going to copy the ceiling here. Shift D, scale that in X, and move that in Y just a little bit so that it's not actually penetrating the walls. Just kind of move it right up against them. Tab into edit mode, and I'll grab all the bottom geometry here and just kind of drag it down so that we have this nice big cube essentially inhabiting the entirety of our scene. Okay, so that's now what that looks like. Whoop, and it looks to me like I need to grab the top edge and bring it down below the level of the ceiling. I don't really want it penetrating the ceiling because I'm not sure what kind of weirdness that could introduce. So basically what we're creating here is this is going to be the volume of the dust inhabiting the room. So let's rename this object. Instead of ceiling.001, we'll call this dust_volume. Okay, and now we need to actually create a volumetric shader for this thing. So I'm going to split out my view, go into a rendered view in our camera here, and in this window we'll change that to a node editor. So underneath our material, instead of a diffuse shader, we're going to change that to transparent. And that allows us to see the room again. And now we need a volumetric shader, so I'm going to add shader volume scatter and plug that into the volume portion here, and you can see that that's pretty thick. We have a density of 1.0. Let's turn that to like 0.025, I think was the value we used in class, and that seemed to work fairly well. And let's turn that down just a little more, 0.01 maybe. Okay, now I'm a little weirded out because I'm not seeing our volume or our light hit the floor anymore, and that did not happen in class, oddly enough. So let me change to a 3D view here and see if that has something to do with either floor penetration or the lack thereof. So let's try moving it up just a touch. Okay, nothing doing there. Let's have it penetrate the floor and see if that changes anything. Nope. I wonder if our anisotropy value has to do something. Honestly, this has got me just a little bit here. I've got to figure this out because I'm not sure exactly what is happening. Let's try volume absorption just in case that was the one we used. Density 0.025. Nope, that's not it. Yeah, I'm not getting the results I expected here. All right, well, we'll save that for another tutorial sometime then. I'm going to delete this cube. Okay, so the other thing that I'm going to show you here really quick is I'm going to tap H to hide my ceiling, and I'm going to show you how to make like a fairly organic looking bedspread. So going to create a cube, scale that in the Z-axis. We'll make a mattress here, scale in Y, That's probably a pretty good size for a bed. Grab that in the Z-axis. Oh, I just figured out what I was doing wrong. Okay, let's undo that. Okay, so here's the problem that I had. I had applied the material that I was making for my volume, the room volume, was also applied to the floor. Okay, so let's change that. So the floor, let's take that material out. Now for the room, let's go back to our rendered view, transparent to surface, volume scatter to volume, and that then should act. Let's turn anisotropy all the way down. 0.025 for our density, I believe, was the value we arrived upon before. Okay. So now you can kind of see we've got some light rays scattering down a little bit. And we actually have our light hitting the floor. Okay, so that works. There's always an explanation, I guess, right? Okay, so I'm going to hide this volume cube and hide the ceiling, and now I'll show you how to make a bed. Okay, so we'll create a cube, scale that in the Z-axis to be roughly mattress sized, scale in Y to kind of make this shaped like a bed, and put it in the corner here. Grab that in the Z-axis. Okay. So there's our really sharp edged mattress. So I'm going to add a subdivision surface modifier to it to round it out. Change my view to 2 subdivisions and go to Tools and smooth shade that thing. Tab into edit mode. We can loop cut and slide this thing, scroll up to make 2 loop cuts, and then I'm just going to scale those in Y so they spread out there. We'll do 2 loop cuts this way, scale them in X, and that's a little more reasonable. You're not going to injure yourself, at least if you try to lay down on that mattress. And we will make a pillow roughly the same way. Matter of fact, why don't we just make a pillow out of the mattress? Shift D and Z. Scale that thing in Y. Scale in X. Tab in edit mode, and we can scale these in X, kind of round out the pillow there. So option click and option shift click to select these 2 loops, scale in Y. And there's our nice rounded pillow. Okay. So it's not exactly art. Nobody's pillow is that fluffy. Scale that in Z and kind of put it there. Okay. Really generic looking bed. I'm going to scoot it away from the wall just a little, give this blanket some room. Okay, so now we're ready to make a blanket. So for the blanket, we're just going to create a plane. Scale that in X, just kind of make it, blanket sized. Scale in Y, grab in Y, scale in Y a little bit, grab in Y. Okay, so that's probably, grab in Z, bring it up above. We're just going to hover it above the bed here. Don't want to hover it too high because we actually have to kind of animate it dropping, and that, takes time. So rather than waste my time, I'll put it down low, make it so it doesn't have to travel far. Okay, so if I tab into edit mode, vertex select mode, I can see that this plane is really simple. It's just made of 4 vertices, and that's not enough to describe, the geometry of a good blanket. So I'll go to my specials menu by tapping W, click subdivide and change the number of cuts all the way up to 10. Do it again. W, subdivide, all the way up to 10. Okay, so that's subdivided 100 times, and that's, you know, think of every single one of these faces as a pixel to describe the folds of our blanket here. So tab in edit mode. I am going to now apply some physics here. So if I click over here on my physics tab, I can click, I have the blanket selected. Let's name that blanket. Physics tab. I have the blanket selected, and I just click cloth to apply a cloth simulation of that, and it's now subject to gravity and folding and all that kind of stuff, just kind of by the defaults. So I need it to run into some things, so I click on the pillow here and I say, okay, you're a collision object. Click collision. Same thing with the mattress, collision. So now if I were to hit play down here on my animation timeline, then I can see what happens as this this blanket kind of falls down, sort of starts to fold and crush and crinkle and all that kind of stuff in a pretty realistic way. And when I'm happy with it, I can just hit pause. So that looks all right. That's pretty geometrically symmetrical. I've never seen cloth do that, but one thing I can definitely see is I've got a flat shaded blanket here. So I click on tools and smooth shade that sucker, and that already looks a lot better. That also, just like in class, that seems like really thin cloth. It seems like maybe it's made of really thin silk, and I don't like that. So I'm going to change my cloth preset to like denim, which I think is going to be fairly thick. I rewind my timeline and hit play again, and now that I've got some new settings there, that should fold a little bit differently. So we can just watch that kind of fold. Okay, and that looks pretty good. So I'm mostly watching these corners here, and I'm going to hit pause when I think those are in a good place. Okay, so that's a pretty, well, we still have that pattern there. I don't know where that's coming from, but anyway, that's a pretty organic looking bedspread, so I think I'm pretty happy with that. And you know, we can apply a material to it. Let's make it, oh, we made it blue in class. I'm going to make it kind of greenish, because that's my favorite color, is the color of green on the Fujifilm canisters is kind of a nice, rich, foresty green. There we go, like that. So this is the kind of bedspread that would keep you up at night. But now, if I unhide everything and we go to a rendered view, we can see our nice natural looking bedspread there getting hit by a ray of sunlight and spreading its green light, its green reflections around the room. Okay, so that's a pretty good start to a room, and that's probably plenty of tutorial for the evening. So I hope this helps, and have a good night.